Gentlemen, we're going to start. I neglected to say that at the table we also collect eyeglasses, cell phones, and toiletries.
Yeah, make sure the eyeglasses are in good shape because I put them back on the board.
Dick Knopf is not here. Are there any guests that are here? I think we have Ira. Just say hello. This is Ira. Just say.
Ira Brooks.
We have a guest. Anybody else? Okay. We have a new member. Oh, I'm sorry. Could you just say just say who you are?
Bob Sperling.
Welcome, Bob.
Welcome, Bob. Stan Schumas, if you can join me. Dave, I don't know if you want to. Okay. We have a new member, and we're delighted to have Stan Schumas join us. And could you just give a brief idea who you are and what you're interested in? Yeah, do it again. Because now we're officially joining us.
This is a test because we haven't previously recorded. We're going to say the same thing.
Okay. Well, Stan Schumas, this is the third time I'm here, and finally they found a shirt for me that'll fit me. So I'd like to say thanks to everybody, and I'm glad the opportunity to meet and participate and see what happens.
Welcome. The JCC has asked me to see if we can get more members to join the JCC. So at your table, there's an application form. I'll try to have some at every table at every meeting. We also have several new board members who will be introduced shortly. But as my last official statement as you're about to be former president, I want to thank the board members who have been so supportive and encouraging and sometimes the boot in the rear end. And I also want to thank all the members who have been so nice to me during my stay as president. With that in mind, one of the goals that I had was to be more active with the Middle Atlantic region, and I've attended almost every meeting. They had an installation of officers last month, and I attended, and they gave me a book, Building a Successful Volunteer Culture. So as my last gesture as president, I'd like to introduce our new president, who will introduce our board members. Turn the gavel and this book over to Marty Raffner.
Get up.
Marty.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ed. Power. I always wanted this.
We want to overthrow the king now.
Oh, I'm supposed to hand you this book.
Oh, hand me the book.
And the gavel. So.
I'd like to reiterate what Ed has said. I'd like to thank the board and Ed for essentially getting me started in this position. We had our first board meeting 2 weeks ago, and I survived it, which is surprising. I have a couple of cheat sheets here because I'm not the greatest of public speakers, nor do I plan to be in. But okay, here we go. We're the new board members. Phil Goderoff. Phil will be our new treasurer. Ed is transitioning the job over to him, and he will effectively take place beginning of September. And let's see, Abe Furtis. Abe is on the board. He's in what we call a non-portfolio position. We're training him to take on some more responsibilities. And
Marty, I want to thank. He brought the vegetables this morning. He saved me a trip, and I appreciate it.
very good. Nelson Mellis is not here. At least I didn't see him. But Nelson is. Okay. Well, anyway, Nelson is also now on the board again with a non-portfolio position. So I just wanted to make notice of that. I'm going to circulate this little article that appeared regarding the South Jersey Men's Club. the South Jersey Men's Club donated $1,200 to the Jewish Senior Lunch Program. It's a program that's in dire need of money. It's really hurting. They need as much support as possible, and we turned over $1,200, and there's a picture with Ed and Rob, and I forget who the other one is, from the JCC. So they're very thankful, and I hope people here in our organization will support the program because, you know, they charge the members like $2.50. It's a losing proposition, and they really need all the support. So anybody who wants to give a donation, please feel free. Okay, good news. Mike Perloff is not here. Yes, so the meeting will be shorter. He and Dick Knopf are down in Washington, D.C., wrapping up the Jewish Federation convention, and he essentially sent me a picture. We won 2 bronze awards, torch awards. The first one was for the Tears for Toys, or whatever it is program, where we essentially... Toys, yes. And the second one is for what we call the Taskmaster. And Don will be getting up to make a request very, very shortly. This is essentially, and you'll be seeing this on the webpage probably next month. We have essentially detailed the assignments for each of the vice presidents of this organization, giving responsibility and itemizing each thing that has to be done to allow for an easy transition for other people who move into the various positions. And hopefully Don can give a little bit more details on that. But anyway, that's 2 more good awards, and I'm sure Mike will bring the plaque and you'll see it here next month. Okay. With that, we will turn around and have some committee reports. Rich, where are you? Rich Moskowitz.
Yeah, today's the big day. A whole bunch of us, we sold a total with Dave Wynn's group and Men's Club, South Jersey Men's Club, 25 tickets. So we'll be going up to Trenton Thunder today. Game's at 5 o'clock. We have 1 ticket left. We had 1 guy that pulled out. So if anyone's interested to go, I do have 1 ticket. We do have carpooling if you can't get it. It's up 295 Route 60, and it takes about a half hour to get there. And the ticket is $8. So if anyone's interested, just tap me on the shoulder. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Len Berman is going to give us a talk about the Mitzvah Fund and the procedures for essentially getting these cards. For those who are new to the organization, the Mitzvah Fund is essentially a fund where people would make a small donation, a minimum of $5, to have a card sent out for a good thing, unfortunately for things like this, etc. And the money goes towards charity. And we had a procedure where you either went on the web or you made a phone call or an email to Len. The board has come up with a suggestion for an alternative process. Not that we can't use the other process also, but it might facilitate and make it easier for everybody. So, Len?
Thank you, Marty, for giving my speech. I have nothing else to say.
Explain.
He's not a good public speaker.
That's right.
I have nothing else to say, other than for the past umpteen years, I have been sending out these cards. Some of you have gotten them, you may have read them, sadly. Some happy occasions, some not so happy occasions. But the board seems to have decided that they think it a good idea to sell the cards here, rather than go through a process of me being contacted by Ed Stein and me sending them out. You can send them out on your own. I think that's what the story was.
Yes.
So if you anticipate dying, or knowing somebody else who's going to die imminently, you might want to purchase a card right now. If not, I will.
That's not the speech.
Marty gave my speech. You know, I don't know what else to say.
I'm going gonna send him a card for butchering this.
This is a mitzvah. It's called a mitzvah card. It's a mitzvah to send a card. It's a mitzvah to give $5 to the men's club. It's a mitzvah to give charity. These are all wonderful things that you can do. And if no one is interested, I'm not sure how this is going to proceed. If you sell cards here, do you give the money to our new treasurer? Have you any clue on how this is going to work?
Treasurer, yes.
The new treasurer.
Will be.
This was his idea.
This was not my idea.
Help you?
Yes, please.
Okay.
What?
Right. It's a very, very nice thing to send a mitzvah card. So we've got these cards already printed up. What we can do is here, we can either sell them individually. I'm thinking maybe we can even sell packs of them.
Is there a discount?
Yes, I would come up with a discount for packs, absolutely. How can you not have a discount on a pack?
We're Jewish.
You keep a couple of these in your cabinet, or in your drawer. You hear about anybody having a birth, a sickness, a death, a graduation, a bar mitzvah, whatever, you pull a card out of your drawer, you address it, and you just send it to them. They know that you made a donation to the men's club.
What does it say?
What does it say? It says nothing. You can write anything you'd like.
Your purple prose.
On the front, where's the rabbi?
There are no vowels.
Yeah, you don't need vowels.
And the best part of it is the envelopes
This is
here are
wonderful.
pre-stamped, so you can
Gives you
stamp
all the
it.
letters of the alphabet. That's Hebrew, so you can write whatever you want.
There you go.
God will take these letters and mix them up.
We're just going.
Compose your own.
That's even better. That's even better. Maybe if you can come up with something good to put on the front other than the alphabet, maybe we can do
And we
that.
give the money to you.
Yeah, give the money to me. We'll get you the cards.
Can we still do the old one?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Why not?
Yes.
For the moment, that's a yes. And let's hope that it's not for too long, because that just sounds like a real hassle.
It was very
But-
cumbersome, the old.
Right. But if you can just keep a few cards in your drawer, anytime you need them, you just send them out, come back and get some more. But I think it would be a very nice thing if everybody had a couple of cards waiting.
Suggestion, in the event that the men's not available, can we keep a supply in the food cabinet?
Sure?
Would it
We
be
have a cabinet. We have a cabinet
We
with a
have
lot
a
of cards in
cabinet.
it.
would it be all right if I just turned this whole thing over and with all the background material and just brought it in next time or and put it in the cabinet? Sure.
There you go.
It has been a pleasure serving you for all of these years. A pleasure. Now you can have your own purple prose on your cards, not mine.
Then you have time to write another novel. I'm working.
Essentially, before I forgot, there were a couple of nice things that, for instance, have happened. I'm sorry. A couple of nice things that have happened in the last month or two. We've had a retirement, Rabbi Aaron. We've essentially had Don Weisenstein today being his 45th anniversary. We've had Don again being a grandpa for the second time. So, just to give you an idea, these are items where theoretically you could send mitzvah cards out.
Can I give a quick one?
Yes.
You don't mind?
Oh, go ahead.
As a former president, I wanted to take 2 minutes. Do you recall a couple years ago, for those who were here, we had a guest speaker, David Silver from the Operation Yellow Ribbon? Your son. My son. And if you recall, he brought a military person, Sergeant Einstein, who served in Afghanistan. The Operation Yellow Ribbon, for those who don't know, it's an organization that does two things. It collects goodies to send overseas to the military. And I mean tons of stuff, not pounds. The other thing they do is they have a homecoming. They welcome the military coming back from overseas. And it's a very moving experience. It's a motorcycle police escort. They have congressmen and mayors giving the whereases. And it's very, very moving. Anyway, recently, Wawa had a contest. And the contest was to offer nonprofit charities the opportunity to win money. And over 150 charities applied. 4 were selected as the finalists, and one of them was Operation Yellow Ribbon, and they won $50,000. So I'm very proud.
Thank you. Don, would you like to speak about fantasy football?
We are continuing to expand. We have 12 teams now. For this season, we went from 8 to 12, and we're probably close to more than 20 people involved. So it's really getting there, and I actually foresee if we added a few more teams next year that we might have to form a second league and have like a Super Bowl format. So that's a very real possibility. If you're still interested in getting involved in some capacity this year, even if it's just a monitor team, I still might be able to do that. Or if you're interested in getting on a waiting list to become a team owner for next year, please let me know. And I want to officially welcome Stan as my co-owner of my team. My son is going to be taking a year off because he has a 2-year-old and now a 1-month-old. And he's still going to run the draft for us, though, so that'll speed things up. There's an organizational meeting on the 13th after the board meeting. That's voluntary for the current owners. And our draft will be right after our general membership meeting on August 27th, right here in this room. So if you're interested in getting involved, I can assure you you'll have just a blast with it.
How about the other new owners? Don't we have a couple other new owners?
Yes, we do. I've tried that, you know.
Oh, sorry.
Ron Ettinger, Ron over here is a new owner. Randy's going to be getting involved with my team in some capacity. Gerson is officially will become the 12th team owner. And Barry is officially an owner with his son. And we could have up to 4 co-owners per team. So the idea is get involved. You can invite your grandchildren. As long as we have an email address, you could have your daughter. The idea is communicating with other people.
What's the date of the draft?
The draft is the 27th. That's right after our general membership meeting, right here. And if somebody wants to come and observe that, that's fine. You could stay and see what some of the things that we do, and you know, you might become interested in that way. Any questions on fantasy? Let me just mention, Marty, the Taskmaster. I'm very thrilled that something I started when I was president, just to keep things organized, that we did win an award for that. One of the things that has come to light is that people aren't too happy with the name Taskmaster. So probably at the next board meeting, I'll ask for permission to maybe run some type of naming contest and maybe a free breakfast or something for the new name that we could give it that is probably more appropriate than Taskmaster. So things keep moving along, and encourage you to get involved.
Right now it's called Pharaoh's List. Thank you, Don. Okay, about 6 to 9 months ago, I don't know the exact date, we had sent out or given out essentially a form effectively asking you for your hobbies, your profession, etc. And we built a database out of it. And some of the input wasn't exactly the greatest, like what's your hobby? I love to eat, you know, I love to go to movies. That's not what we were looking for. So we'd like to update that list. So we'll probably next month again give you forms to fill out. These forms essentially will then be consolidated with the existing database, and it'll be put up on the web, our website, and made available. Now, in itself, it's good for the board in case we need to look for a certain talent. But it's also good for you guys. Let's say, for instance, that you have some carpentry work you need done, and about the only thing you can do is make a telephone call. So you might look down this list and see if somebody's got carpentry as a hobby. Maybe they'll help you. We're not talking about where you're going to get money, but they may want to help you just because they're nice people. So the idea is for each of us to help each other, and hopefully at a good price, namely 0. Okay, the web Next month, we should have most of the functionality available so that you could all look at it. Right now, on the web, although you can't look at it at this point, we have a list of all of the meetings from September through next August. Most of the things will be available for you to look at. The only thing that wouldn't be, obviously, be stuff like board minutes, things like that. So please look forward to getting on. The web page or pages are growing. They're getting better. We have to get a process to expedite to put information in a little faster, but other than that, please use it. We'll still continue sending out emails about meetings, but the web is the way to go. That's the way the real world is right now. So anyway, the last board member, let's see, Ed. This has to do with our budget, our upcoming budget. We need approval from the members of the South Jersey Men's Club in order to have a budget.
So there's really no surprises. At the board meeting a couple of weeks ago, or last week, I guess it was, we pretty much decided that we can maintain the breakfast charge at 7 and the dues at 42. So hopefully everybody is happy with that. Still a good value and some money to go to charities and so forth, and you know, the ability to keep our club solvent. There's really very little difference between the 2 years, although we are planning to have a law enforcement breakfast again during this coming fiscal year. And the fiscal year begins September 1st, ends August 31st. And we did not have the law enforcement breakfast during this fiscal year. We had it the year before, and looks like it's maybe going to be every 2 years now. It kind of depends on the law enforcement community and Mike Perloff. Other than that, I don't think there's anything remarkable that I need to tell you about. We obviously continue to grow, which is great. I mean, I guess I've been around for 6 or 7 years. We had 50, 60 members when I joined. Currently, we're at 115 or 116, and that's what I'm projecting for next year. We get an average of about, during the year, we had an average of about 48 for breakfast. So it's a nice group, as you can tell. Look around. So I guess that's about it. So we really need a vote on the budget, and hopefully someone will...
I motion that we accept the 2018 budget as submitted.
Second. Go first.
Okay. Everybody? Aye. Any nays? Thank you. Yes.
This says dues, $4,830.
Yes.
Is that the new annual amount each member pays?
Yes. Yes. The other thing is, in the next meeting, I'll announce in the next meeting, there'll also be a dues notice going out at the same time. So if you want to make it simple, rather than having to send a check to our new treasurer, if you would bring a check along for dues, at the next meeting, we can start collecting them. And for those who don't, we'll send out a reminder email and another reminder email.
Yeah, I just did it for you.
Hopefully by November, we'll have everybody rejoining. Thank you. Thanks again for all the table captains who work every week to collect the monies for the breakfast.
Yes, Bob.
For those of you who didn't look all that carefully at the budget, there has been no dues increase going into next year, which means that we have not had a dues increase, correct me if I'm wrong, for at least 5 years.
That's a problem.
Yeah, I
No,
would say at
no,
least that, yes.
that goes to the great job that Ed has done in controlling costs.
And let me iterate, same thing with the food, with the breakfast, $7. It's amazing how Ed is controlling the cost of that, because everything is going up. The bagels, since Ed took over, we used to pay about $5, essentially for a dozen bagels. Today I was charged 95 cents a bagel. or $11.40 a dozen. So that doubled. I'm sure the price of lox and herring and everything else has probably doubled also. So, great job, Ed. Okay, just a reminder, there'll be an investment club meeting right after this meeting. Okay, Dave Schwartz, would you like to introduce our guest?
Before I do that, good morning, by the way. Before I do that, I'd like to mention that our men's club hosts a men's club meeting the third Thursday of each month at Lionsgate. I think we just did our 6th one this past week. We meet in the assisted living wing. They provide a lox and bagel breakfast at no charge to either us or their people. We've had from only 8 attendees Thursday, this past Thursday, it's had 14, 15 guys. It's a bunch of terrific people. We've gotten them to talk about their pasts, what they've done in sports, where they grew up, and we try to keep them interested for an hour or two with breakfast, and it's a wonderful mitzvah to go. I'm mentioning it to you because I would like to take generally 1 or 2 people with me each month.
When is that again, Dave?
The third Thursday of each month. And I'd like to thank Rob Sachs and Barry Adler, who went with me Thursday, who easily participated with these guys. Lionsgate wanted to keep them there permanently, but I was able to get them out of get them out of the building.
What time?
And the breakfast was great.
What time?
We meet 10:30, and we meet 10:30. I'll tell you how to get there. It's right near the high school, Laurel Oak Drive. Assisted living wing. Quick announcement, next month's speaker is Rabbi Eileen Schneider, an author, and also the wife of Rabbi Gans, who spoke last month. She's asked if she could. I said I don't mind, as long as I get a free one. Anyway, she wrote 3 books, 2 of which are Hanukkah Guilt and Unleavened Dead, or the title. So I thought that's very interesting.
The third one is Yom Keller.
Thank you.
They're mysteries.
Thank you.
Yes, and I am a character.
You're a character.
Last quick thing before I introduce Carl is that Marty Raffner had someone call me, who I will be talking to today or this week, about a potential walking tour in Princeton. We can either walk or take a bus. Everything is up. It's in obviously the early stages of planning. Could I have a quick show of hands who might be interested in doing something like that? Thank you. It won't be a Saturday, it may be probably a Sunday.
See Einstein's house.
Yeah, and Drumwacketh, is that how you say it? Wacketh? All right, back to our speaker. I'd like to thank Gary and Randy for suggesting that we invite Carl Montoya, who's here today, to speak about the Conversos Crypto Jews of New Mexico, rediscovering a Sephardic heritage. Please welcome Carl Montoya.
Yeah, I've got my timer here because I was told that if I take too long, that when it's time to go, people are going to walk out. So I'm going to be very cautious about limiting my time.
We're just going to institute people.
But thank you very much, Dave, for having me, and thank you to the Men's Club for letting me speak today. My story, my background: I was retired as senior government manager for U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and I've been in the Foreign Service and overseas, and been on both coasts for the government. So I've really done a lot of different things. And I worked at the regional office here in Philadelphia until I retired a couple of years ago. So that's just really a brief history on my background. What I want to do is as Dave mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the crypto Jews in New Mexico, because it's a very unique happening experience that happened in New Mexico, and I'm just one of many. So I'm really telling the story not just for myself, but for all of us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through fairly quickly. I'm going to talk a little bit about terminology. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Spanish-Portuguese Inquisition. And again, the time is limited, so I'm just going to touch on these topics and the impact on the Jewish population. I also want to talk about my brief family history, just to give it context, and to give New Mexico, where I'm from originally, some context. And then my personal journey. I grew up as a good Catholic boy, and now I'm a board member of 2 synagogues. One is near Talmud in Cherry Hill, where Gary and Randy are members, and that's where I know them. But I also belong to Mikveh Israel synagogue, the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in Old City in Philadelphia. And we have a great chef there, and Dennis, his father, is here. So it's nice to see you here, Dennis. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit. When I give my talks, people will say, well, oh yeah, I know all about Marranos. That term has kind of fallen out of use. We don't use the term Marranos so much anymore. It's kind of it's a pejorative. It's kind of viewed by some as a pejorative term. The preferred term now is anusim, the forcibly converted. So that's so you'll hear me talk about the anusim. I really won't use Marranos, but we're all talking the same thing. It's a forcibly converted. Or you'll hear conversos, new Christians, and those are other terms used, and that's self-explanatory. Or you'll hear secret, or rather crypto Jews. And those are the ones that were forcibly converted and managed to maintain their religious practices, customs throughout the centuries. Not everybody was a crypto Jew. Some were very, wanted to convert and did so willingly, but there's others that didn't want. Many were forcibly converted, and they didn't get conversion taken lightly. So that's a little bit about that. Now, what I wanted to talk about too is the impact of the Inquisition on the world Jewish population. In 1300, the year 1300, there were 2 million Jews in the world. And these are rough estimates and generally acknowledged by historians. 85 of those were Sephardim or Mizrahim, from the Middle East. So that was about 1.7 million. Now, 15% were the Ashkenazim. So they were just way in low numbers. So they're around 300,000. So you fast forward 200 years, and the Jewish population, formerly 2 million, is down to 1.5 million. So we've gone 200 years, and we've lost 25% of our world jewelry. And that lets you know the impact of what happened with the forcible conversions. Most of them occurred in Spain and Portugal. So that gives you an impact. But those, what I want to make clear is those Jewish souls did not disappear from the face of the earth. Many of them became Catholic souls or Christian souls, mostly Catholic souls. And that's where the story begins, because I'm one of them. I'm a child of the Inquisition. And just to give you a quick history, my family were Portuguese. They came from Coimbra, Portugal. And Portugal had a different experience, Portuguese Jews, than Spain. People tend to lump them all together. Everybody knows pretty much that Spain kicked out the Jews in 1492. What people don't forget is Portugal never kicked out their Jews. Portugal said, when Spain kicked theirs out in 1492, in 1497, the king of Portugal said to the king of Spain, "We have no more Jews in Portugal." He forcibly converted them. So he wouldn't let them leave. He needed the map makers. He needed their scientists, their doctors. He needed their expertise. He didn't let them go. So the Portuguese Jews had to stay were not given the option of getting kicked out of leaving the country. So that's the big difference between Spain and Portugal. Now what happened is the Portuguese Inquisition did not start until 1526. And the Inquisition was worse than in Spain. It was a bloodbath in Portugal. They would just go into villages, they would ask people to come to the church, and then they would say, okay, tell us who all the new Christians are. And the old Christians were quick to say, oh, here's all the new Jews here, take them. And they did. And they were all guilty until proven innocent. If they had any wealth or anything, any influence, their wealth was taken away from them. So it was very hard conditions. And then there's so many people that went to the New World that, and a Portuguese background, that if somebody were to be called a Portugueso, a Portuguese, that was an epithet for a Jew. He's a Portugueso. And so the New World, where the Inquisition was flooded with Portuguese Jews, and my ancestors were part of that. And they came there in 1579 with a guy by the name of Luis de Carvajal, who founded Monterrey, Mexico. That's Mexico's high-tech capital, by the way, Monterrey and Nuevo Leon. That was founded by Luis Carvajal. And there was some interesting information, because his diary, he wrote a diary, and it was lost for 100 years. It was recently found. So there's been a lot of news media about the finding of this lost diary of Luis de Carvajal. And I'm going to fast forward here. So when my ancestors came to Mexico, the Inquisition was heating up. It was already there. It preceded them. So that was their bad luck. So what happened in 1596, this Luis Carvajal, here he is, the governor of Monterrey, of the state of Nuevo Leon. He had some family members that were crypto-Jews, but they couldn't keep it quiet. So many of them, his sisters and his mother, they were practicing outwardly. And they paid for that because they were burned at the stake in Mexico City. I think there were about 7 members of his family in 1596. Now, at that time in 1596, there was a colony getting ready to go to New Mexico. New Mexico was about as far to the end of civilization as you can get. It was hostile territory. There was marauding Indians everywhere. And it was not a pleasant place to go, but that colony wanted to go, and they did. And they settled. They didn't get their clearance to go until 1598. And so that settlement of New Mexico, with about 500 settlers, 600 settlers, were part of my founding families. And because of what was going on with the Inquisition, we don't know how many crypto-Jews were in that, but there were a number of crypto-Jews, and I'll cover that later. But that's kind of the unique experience of New Mexico. Now, what I want to do, I want to fast forward a little bit to my journey in the 60s. And because my family, we've been in New Mexico since that time. And I was born there, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. I remember when I started doing genealogy, and I'd say, Grandpa, where were you born? He said, New Mexico. And I said, well, do you remember, where your father was born? He said, sure, New Mexico. What about your grandpa? New Mexico. Everything was New Mexico. So I had no idea how many generations back we came, but I knew it was a number of generations. But so what happened during the 60s, those were turbulent times. I think, and I think most people here, by looking around, were here in the 60s. And there was a new awareness going on in the country. And you had these Black Power movements going on. You had Native Americans, they were occupying Alcatraz Island in San Francisco. And you had the Chicano movement, the Hispanic movement in the Southwest and West. And remember, they used to mention this melting pot theory, that we should just all melting pot. You don't hear that anymore. That's kind of gone out of the way. It was jettisoned about that time. So what happened is I was no exception. I wanted to know, who am I? Where did we come from? Because my dad was a banker in Arizona. We lived in Scottsdale. And we just, we're right on the Mexican border, obviously, Arizona borders, and so does New Mexico. And I thought, well, maybe we came up from Mexico a couple generations before. And that's when I started doing genealogy. And I kept going back and back until the founding. Then I was able to go back before that. And so I realized, you know, we've been around for a while, but I didn't know at the time anything about crypto Jews because nobody had done any research about it. And the first time that I ever encountered a Jew, and I know from your experience here, this is hard to fathom, but growing up in Arizona in the 50s and 60s, I never ran into a Jew, either in grade school or in high school, or anybody that held themselves out as being Jewish. And so my first encounter with a Jew was in college, and I had a university professor, and he was musing one time about Marx and Freud and Einstein, and just casually mentioned they were Jews. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because as a good Catholic boy, the only thing I knew about Jews was during Easter time, or Pesach. That was a time where they read the Passion. The Passion is a New Testament reading. It's about a 20-minute reading, and it talks about the crucifixion of Christ. And it talks about the Pharisees. They were the bad guys that brought, you know, Christ before Pontius Pilate and made sure he got crucified. So that's all I ever knew about Judaism and Jews. I mean, we didn't know very much out there. But this, for whatever reasons, it's inexplicable. That had a profound effect on me. He gave me a book by Max DeMont, Jews, God, and History, which I dutifully read. And it was amazing. And I was just, I just developed this affinity for Jews at that time. And throughout my professional career and personal career, I'd always, you know, I had an affinity. I didn't look for Jews, but I seemed, when I developed friendships at work or personal relationships, they just happened to be Jewish. And so although my first marriage was to a non-Jewish woman, I still had that affinity. In fact, last year I was at a conference in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and this person came up to me, and her name is Linda Goff, and she said, "Carl, do you remember me?" We met in London back in 1980 when I was in the Foreign Service in London. Her husband was a Foreign Service officer like I was. And she was astounded because, and by the way, she's president of the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society. She was at this conference, and she said, "But I knew you as a Catholic boy. I was reading your bio," and she said, "I know that's Carl Montoya, but his bio and his Jewish background, where did this come from?" So she was shocked, but pleasantly surprised. And now with this crypto-Jewish thing, there's a Dr. Stanley Hortas, and he was our first historian in New Mexico. New Mexico had never had a Jewish historian before. And when he got to Santa Fe, he had these Hispanic people that were coming up to him and wanting to meet with him and saying, "Well, you know, our family lights candles on Friday night. Does that mean anything? Or we bake bread on Fridays too? Or our family's always abstained from pork. Or our family, makes a point to, when they kill a beef, that they always drain the blood very thoroughly. And or our family, doesn't like to work on Saturday. That's our day of rest." And at first, he just kind of sloughed it off, and he said, "Well, coincidences." But then these people kept coming at him and kept raising the same questions. So he thought, well, maybe we've got something here. So then he started accumulating some research, and then he took a sabbatical. He actually got a Fulbright, went to Mexico City, and he started looking into the Inquisition records. They're all intact in Mexico City. And he was able to find a connection of the New Mexico founding families and the Inquisition records. And that's how this all began. And then he started documenting all these crypto-Jewish practices. Now, my family had these customs, but we had no clue. Too many centuries had passed. We just know we did them. So when my parents, when their parents passed away, every year on their anniversary death, they always lit candles. And I just took it for granted. All Catholics do that. But if you ask Italian Catholics, Irish Catholics, Polish Catholics, they've never heard of that. And then they would cover mirrors when somebody died. That's just something they'd always done. Now, my family, they had gotten rid of the covering mirrors tradition a generation before because they were moving to the cities, and they were thinking, what's all these country habits and traditions we picked up, and what's the use? Nobody else does it. So they had stopped doing some of these traditions. And also our family names, tended to be from the Jewish Bible, like my mother's Esther, my dad is Joseph. And my grandfather, great-grandfather was Daniel, and my uncle's Daniel, and I've got a Jacob. We called him Uncle Jake, but it was Jacobo, Jacob. And Solomon, cousin Saul, and cousin Benny from Benjamin. So all these names were in my family, but I also found that we were very tight-knit families. Endogamy was very prevalent. My mom and dad are both related. They're both cousins. I don't think I'm too crazy. I think they're third cousins. But that's everybody was interrelated in New Mexico in our group. There was one tradition that I kind of ignored, and it's a peculiar one. And it's when women sweep the house, they sweep dirt to the center of the room, and then they put it in a dustpan and take it out the door that way. They don't sweep dirt out the door. And I thought, well, that's peculiar. And I asked some of my elderly aunts if they did that, and they said, well, my mother used to make us do that, and I never knew why. Well, I think they didn't want to disrespect the non-existent mezuzah that would have been in the doorways. And I discounted that. But one thing that you see crypto-Jews, whether it's in Latin America or North Africa, this peculiar tradition seems to come up over and over again, no matter where they went. And like I say, I kind of threw that away in the beginning, thinking, well, that's not a big deal. One thing that surprised me, I belonged to Mikveh Israel and synagogue, and my grandmother used to always put her hands on our head and bless us. Now, my grandmother was a very short woman, and as I got bigger, she couldn't reach me, so I had to get down on my knees so she could put her hands on my head. And I was really blown away when I was at a Sephardic service at Mikveh Israel downtown, and for whatever reason or other, our president of our synagogue had come up to me and he put his hands on my head and he blessed me. And I said, I went nuts. I thought, wait a minute, that's what my grandmother used to do. So then what happened years later is, as I discovered my crypto-Jewish background, I'd been delaying a DNA test. And DNA testing was becoming very hot, a very big deal. And I took a test, and it's called a Y-DNA, and I'm not going to get into all the technical stuff, but it's only for men. And it goes father, son, throughout the millenniums. And it turned out I've got the J Kohané, the J2, which is for Kohanim. So that means that my ancestors had a strong likelihood of this Jewish high priest gene. And I got to tell you, I was at dinner a couple years ago. We had a team of Israeli doctors. They were at Mikveh Israel, and they sat at their own table on Shabbat on Friday evening dinner. And then afterwards, people tend to want to talk, and he got up and said, well, we're all, whether you consider yourself Sephardic or Ashkenazi, he said, we're really all one when you look at DNA. And, and he just kind of made slight mention of DNA. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I wonder, I didn't catch his name. He was Dr. Carl Skorecki. He was the guy that started the DNA testing. He had this hypothesis. He said, well, if we have this tradition of Kohanim, in Jews, shouldn't there be some similarities? And so he said, let's test it with DNA. And so he started this testing project. And it turned out, it was like 60-70% of the Kohanim fell under this DNA. There's some Kohanim that fall under other DNAs besides the J1 and J2, but most of them fell into the J1, J2. So it's very, very fascinating that over the millennia and with the diaspora and with the split in the Ashkenazi Sephardim, we all go back to the beginning and there's relationships there. So the unfortunate news about the DNA findings is a number of the Hispanics in New Mexico inherited the Ashkenazi, the Jewish gene, the BRCA1, BRCA2. They're getting cancers. And if you're 1 out of every 4 individuals of Ashkenazi ancestry, according to Centers for Disease Control, may have this mutation and are susceptible, predisposed to breast, ovarian cancers, prostate cancers, and such. New Mexico Hispanics have this gene too, and they're starting to test them earlier now so they can catch it. So that's an interesting thing about that. Now, I returned to Judaism in 2011. My wife and I married in 1998, and 13 years elapsed, and even though I went to services with her the whole time, I never converted. But I think, and one day I said, I'm ready. And there was no aha moment. I'm not a dramatic guy. I'm not an outgoing, gregarious kind of guy. I just knew my time was ready. And so I did. I converted in 2011. I had great support from my wife's family throughout the years of our marriage, and I've got Ira Brooks here that was kind enough to come from this as one of our cousins. No one ever asked me, kidded me about being the goy in the family, or talked about, when are you going to convert? Nobody ever brought it up. That wasn't even, they just treated me like family, and that was that. So there was no pressure, there was nothing. So I did. Now, I went through the full conversion process. I went through the conservative process. At the time, the rabbi who was conservative said, are you ever thinking going to be Orthodox? I said, no. See, I didn't know that much about Orthodox, and when I think Orthodox, I think of the Hasidim in New York City wearing the hats and the black coats, and I thought, no way. I don't want that. So I did go through the Hadafat Dam Brit. That's a ritual circumcision because I'd already been circumcised, and it's not often that I meet a moil who's an Orthodox cantor who said, "Hi, Carl, how are you? Pull down your pants, please." But it was quick and it was pretty painless. I paid him extra for that, and we got it done. And I did the Beit Din, the Jewish court, and I did the ritual immersion. What I also was able to do is, traditionally, if you're a convert, you typically will pick up the names of Abraham and Sarah. And I use my parents' name of Yosef and Esther. So that means a lot to me to be able to use my parents' names. And then we subsequently joined a synagogue in Philly. And we had no idea that there was a Sephardic synagogue in Philly. My wife just was on the internet, and she said to me one morning, "Do you know there's a synagogue in Philly that's Sephardic, that's Spanish, Portuguese, Minhag?" And I said, no. And so that's how we found out about Mikveh Israel, and that's how we got involved, and I became a member, and then I was invited to be on their board. So in the Mikveh Israel is only one of 2 Spanish-Portuguese synagogues in the U.S. There's actually 3. One is in Canada. There's 3 in North America, in Montreal, that are Spanish-Portuguese, and this would be modern Orthodox. What's unique about these 3 synagogues is our Siddur, our prayer book, is taken from the Converso Jews who were kicked out of Spain and went to Amsterdam. That's our mother's synagogue. And they brought their traditions with them that were put in the Siddur. So many of our traditions, our melodies, are Spanish-Portuguese. So that's as close as I'm going to get to my Spanish-Portuguese heritage. And that's how why I wound up in Mikveh Israel. Now, in telling this story, My family has never heard this story before. They don't care about our family history. They don't want to know about our Jewish connection at all. And that's not unusual for somebody like myself who's a returned Jew, who's a converso. That typically happens. I'm the only one in my family who's converted and likely will remain the only one. That's just the way it is. I think for one thing, my family, when you look at Judaism and Jews, they have their own world. They have their own holidays. Who does that? And they have, just their own, their kosher requirements. And, from my family's point of view, not knowing, like myself, they grew up not knowing much about Jews and Judaism. For them it's like, well, this is this cult out there. Do they believe in God? I mean, they really don't have any clue about Jews and what they believe, and certainly not about all their traditions and so forth. So I think also for many of my family being, they're already identified as Hispanics, and I'm thinking, well, if we acknowledge that we have some Jewish background, do we really want to add anti-Semitism to the mix too? I mean, how complicated do we want to make this? And I think also I have many members in my family who are very staunch Catholics. So for me to bring up the fact that I've converted and I returned, that I'm Jewish, that we're from Jewish background, they don't want to hear that. Because for them they feel like they would be being a traitor to their Catholic background. So I want to just tell you just very briefly about the potential, about the unseen communities, back to the forcibly converted. If you look in Spain and Portugal now, according to DNA estimates, Spain, about 20% of Spanish and Portuguese men have Jewish blood, based on DNA estimates. If you go into the Southwest in New Mexico, in Latin America, there's another 10-15% of people who have Jewish blood. And so conservatively, there's like more than 100 million people out there that have Jewish blood. And now what's making it even more interesting, technology. More and more records are coming online. People that couldn't get access now are suddenly finding, hey, wait a minute, I can find these records now. They're online. And then more and more people are doing DNA studies. Now, I belong to the New Mexico Genealogical Society. It's obviously it's secular, it's non-religious, and it's strictly history. But we have 4,500 members, and at least every week there's somebody who says, I got this DNA test back. It shows about 12% Sephardic background. Could this be Jewish background? And this happens week after week after week. So there's a lot of people now that are getting very, very curious about this background. And doesn't mean they want to convert or anything. They're just curious. And then also Portugal and Spain are paying attention. And you may have read about this, but in February and June of 2015, both Portugal and Spain offered citizenship to Sephardic Jews who were kicked out. It's a little bit too little, too late, but they're offering citizenship. And so anyway, that's happening. And Israel is also beginning to pay attention. In October 2015, they had an Anusim conference at the Knesset in Israel that drew some widespread attention. So we're getting there. I know in 2011, the Orthodox Rabbinical Court in Israel, they issued a religious ruling that recognized the 20,000 descendants from Majorca. This is a Spanish island where the Inquisition, where these were forcibly converted. And then after they were converted, they were just considered outsiders in the community and were never really accepted until later years. So that group stayed together. So much so that the Orthodox court ruled that they had the right of return to Israel. So these things are happening. That's a Moroccan community known as the Chuetas. So So this is so these things are going on, and some people are saying, well, will New Mexico's crypto-Jews be next to be recognized by the rabbinical court? I know one rabbi said, well, they're about 20 years away for that because those decisions take a long time. So, but there's increasing awareness. I was talking to Ira, I know last year at Bethel and Cherry Hill, they had a Anusim Hispanic speaker who was a conservative rabbi who spoke to us about his background, and his name was Rabbi Devin Maimon Villarreal. He was a Hispanic guy. So I'm going to kind of wind up here. So this gives you an idea of my background, and really the bottom line is genealogy really doesn't matter. DNA doesn't matter. What matters is in your heart and soul. I've spent so much of my life going after the genealogy. I wanted facts, and then the DNA was helpful. It's not the all solution, but it's really what's in your heart and soul. And I've been wandering for ever so long and wondering, something in me I knew was not right, and I found that inner peace, and I really do feel this sense of fulfillment. And I just want to end with a quote. This is from Mark Twain that somehow resonates with this presentation, that all things are mortal but the Jews. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? So we're still here, folks, and thank you for letting me share my story. Yes.
You mentioned that there were several traditions that somehow got maintained even though the people were Catholic.
Yes.
Since you were kind enough to share your personal history that you were already circumcised, was that a tradition that was maintained, or was that something more modern?
I don't know. I think that's something that's been done for a long time, with my fathers and grandfathers. But I don't know that was, in New Mexico, that was pretty standard practice. So I don't know if it's because of the settlement there, that initial settlement where they did that, but that's not unusual in New Mexico. It's very typical. Yes, sir.
Carl, I read
Bill.
somewhere, I don't know if it was a fact, where a lot of those, like you were saying, conversos and so forth, what they would do is they kept, they converted so that they could be part of, and they held their ceremonies differently, like where nobody would know what was going on.
Yeah.
And that's another possibility that could also pop up too.
Yeah.
I don't know how, like I say, I don't remember where I read it.
Yeah.
But when you're talking, you're bringing back, things are coming back.
Yeah. Well, there weren't too many, to be frank, there weren't too many religious traditions that were done. It was mostly all these other, peripheral traditions. But yes, sir.
You said you started going to synagogue with your Jewish wife?
Yes.
How did you meet her?
Well, we met dancing, to be honest with you.
Had nothing to do with you.
No, but I had to, once I was divorced, I had to be, I really wanted to marry somebody Jewish. That didn't mean I was looking particularly for somebody Jewish, it just whoever attracted me. But fortunately, she happened to attract me, and she happened to be Jewish. So I'm very, very happy. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the original settlement was late 1500s?
1598.
And there were 500, but not all conversant.
No. And that's the last thing they wanted to do, was let the Inquisition know that they were crypto-Jews. So everything was kept quiet. And even New Mexico in the early years, there was a governor in New Mexico. They brought charges brought him before the Inquisition. He died, and they couldn't, before they could have him stand up for the charges. But there were crypto-Jewish things happening in New Mexico in the early history of that colony. So they kept it quiet. Yes, sir, in the back.
Now that you've returned to Judaism, how do you see the other side when you were a Catholic? How do you see Judaism and Catholicism, the teachings that you had in the Catholic Church, and how that influenced you over the years toward Judaism and Catholicism?
Well, in Catholicism, you're used to the Pope who makes all the decisions. In Judaism, you can think for yourself. So if Reconstructionist works for you, if Reform works for you, Conservative, Orthodox, whatever, that's great. You can make your own choices. That's probably the big factor for me. Yes, sir.
Has there been any study on the attitude, once you learn that you may have Jewish roots, on an attitude toward anti-Semitism and changing? Has there been any kind of study on that?
On anti-Semitism?
And once you discover that you have Jewish roots, has there been any change in attitudes toward Jews on the part of individuals who learn this?
Yeah, I don't, the question is with people find out they have Jewish roots, does that change their anti-Semitism any? I don't know that there have been studies done on that. But this is probably a good segue. I'm bringing a conference to Philadelphia in November, and it's likely going to sell out quickly. It's a society I belong to, a Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies. And basically, for history lovers, it's a study of the Inquisition, a study of the forcibly converted. And we're going to have not only presenters there from academia, we're going to have people there who want to share their stories. And so we're going to be bringing that. And Dave, if I could, I'd send you a flyer that, if you would like to circulate to the group. But it should be fascinating. Dr. Ronnie Perellis from Yeshiva University just wrote a book on crypto-Jews. It's going to be our keynote. And there's a guy by the name of David Gitlitz. And David wrote a book on secrecy and deceit of crypto-Jewish practices. And so he's a fascinating guy. He's also going to be a featured speaker. So if yes, sir.
So how did the Jews assimilate into New Mexico? I know that it's Spanish and everything, but how did they get there?
You mean the Jews that are there now?
Yeah.
They came in the 1850s. A lot of them came from Germany. But there was no connection between the crypto-Jews and the German Jews. The German Jews came in, they pretty much stayed to themselves, and they brought their people over from Germany, their wives.
Very few from Spain actually came to New Mexico.
As far as that were actual Jews? Correct. Yes. Yes, sir.
A few years ago, there was a cancer study done by the American Cancer Society on a group of migrant workers that had green cards, and they went through southwestern United States and up to north picking and harvesting. So a whole family migrated each year for about 6 months. The reason the Cancer Society got involved is they were invited to evaluate a tremendous cluster, an inappropriate cluster of these migrant Spanish workers, Mexican workers, that had breast cancer. And they were BRCA positive. And he said they are Jews. They said they're not Jews, they've been generations of Catholics, generations as far back as written history. And yet when they interviewed them, they had little habits that had come through them, like sweeping to the center of the room, picking up the dust, and carrying it out, like braided bread, and celebrating Shabbos on Saturday instead of on Sunday. And has that been involved, that recent revelation? That's only been a few years ago.
Yeah, no, that's very much a consideration. I know in New Mexico, a lot of our folks are working with the Hispanic community to have them test earlier for the BRCA1, BRCA2 gene. So there's a new sensitivity to that because they know they have this, predilection to getting that. Let me just balance. Yes, sir.
Yeah, with that part of the family that remains staunchly Catholic, how do they feel when you point out that some of these traditions, the lighting of candles on Friday night, the sweeping up in the pattern, which I suggest might be a variation of the search for hummus. How do they feel when you point out that it might be Jewish tradition?
Well, they asked what of my family, how do they feel when I point out some of our Jewish traditions? They find it interesting. And, oh, thank you, yeah, that's very interesting. And then they go back to what they were doing. They just don't want to get into it. Even my own sons, I have 4 adult sons. They love me to pieces, but, Dad, talk about something else. Let's talk football or whatever. They're not interested. Yes,
Carl,
Randy.
2 quick things. One was
You have to remind me, did you go to Catholic, before college, did you go to Catholic school, like K through 12? Or was it-
No, I didn't go to Catholic school, but I went through catechism by nuns that were worse than Catholic school.
And the second question is, when did you get that feeling that, I must say, you might have felt different, or just there was something that wasn't quite kosher? When did you start to get those feelings? 5, 6, 10?
Well, those feelings had always been there, and I knew that someday I would. I just hadn't pulled the trigger. And my wife said, she said, you astound me because you never give away your feelings. You never, it's hard to predict you. And she said, and then one day you come up to me and you say, after 13 years, and we've been together about 15 years actually before we were married. And she said, so after 15 years, suddenly you walk in the door and you say you're ready to convert. And that's basically what had happened. I guess I was just ready, Randy. But I think you know me well enough. I'm not a guy for the dramatic. I'm too low key. But that's how it happened. I don't have anything exciting to, say about that. David, I don't want to.
No, if I ask one more question.
Okay.
I have a question about, so you attend the Sephardic synagogue in Philadelphia. What is it rather, how does it feel? Does it give you a sense of connection? Are the tunes something that's familiar in a deep sense? I know it's a Spanish-Portuguese rite. Most of the people there are Sephardic from Eastern Sephardic rite. So but does it feel like home? And what type of connection do you have when you visit, let's say, Israel, or New York, or maybe to Amsterdam?
Yeah, that connection means a lot to me, Rabbi, and the feeling is like I'm home. But I also feel very intimidated at that synagogue, and even now, I've been with them 5 or 6 years, I still am intimidated by them. And that's my personal thing. And also, it's interesting you brought it up. I had made mention earlier that I converted with the Orthodox conservative. And everybody here knows how Jews work. I'm now in a modern Orthodox synagogue. They don't use shul. And Rabbi said nicely to me one time, he said, well, conservative conversion is good. But, they may have missed a few things. And, you need to consider doing the Orthodox thing. So I still have that ahead of me.
But they put you on the board.
They put me on the board, and they put me what we call the Teba, you call it the Bima. And so I get called for the Aliyah, I can hold the Torah. The rabbi treats me the same, fortunately, and so does everybody else.
One follow-up question. Are you Spanish speaking?
No. My father was in the banking profession. This was in the 1950s, 1960s. There was a lot of prejudice in the Southwest. You talk about the South, and people. Even in New Mexico, now my parents grew up speaking Spanish as a primary language, but even then there was a lot of prejudice. And my dad just said, the melting pot. That was my dad's approach. He said, well, I want you to speak English. Well, he didn't realize we could have spoken both English and Spanish fluently just as well. But he said, nope. So even till they only spoke Spanish until my grandparents died. It's the only time they used their Spanish. When my grandparents passed on, he and my mom never spoke Spanish again, unless they absolutely had to. And I don't know.
Carl, thank you very much for that. We'd like to essentially bestow upon you honorary membership in our organization. Okay. Come back any time, have a breakfast, enjoy.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we'd like to also give to you this certificate of appreciation.
Okay.
I guess we're going to get... Now, you only have one more job left. The 50-50. Here's your opportunity to call my number.
This is my job.
Hand him your ticket, Carter. Yeah, here's my ticket. Pick any one.
Let me just...
Okay. 725-491. You picked the wrong ticket.
1-9.
491. Hey, do I get a piece of that? I delivered this.
Thank you very much.
Losing streak.